Good evening, everyone. Tonight's panel participants are calling in from locations across the world. May I ask you to join us in acknowledging the various indigenous communities which you have just read on your screen, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. I am Vernon Scott, Assistant Director of Special Events for the Joyce Theater Foundation. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I identify as an African-American gay male. I'm wearing a bright orange sweater, sitting in front of a darkened window with red poinsettias and candles on the window ledge. Welcome to the next installment of the Joyce's Dancing Dialogues, a series of live moderated panel discussions. Tonight's topic is adapting the Nutcracker. We are joined by four brilliant choreographers who will delve into why the Nutcracker continues to be such a compelling piece to adapt and reframe. Before I turn it over to tonight's moderator, I have a few quick thank yous and reminders. First, thank you to our panelists and moderator for joining us this evening and exploring this seasonal topic. Please note that one of our panelists, Troy Schumacher, has a performance this evening and may need to leave us earlier than expected. And a special thank you to our American Sign Language interpreter, Michael Fisher, who will be signing throughout tonight's program. We do encourage you to utilize the live chat function on both YouTube and Facebook to engage with one another and to post questions for our panelists. There will be a Q&A opportunity toward the latter part of the panel. We are streaming live tonight, so we do ask for your understanding if there is a technical delay. Our team is working hard behind the scenes to keep everything running smoothly. Following tonight's program, the Joyce will be posting a recording on our YouTube page that will be available for 30 days. Thank you to the Joyce's sponsor for Dancing Dialogues, First Republic, and our trustee, Lauren Short, for their generous support of this series. First Republic's commitment to the art of dance helps the Joyce to present Dancing Dialogues free of charge. If you enjoyed tonight's panel and would like to support the Joyce's continued programming, please visit joyce.org/donate. This evening's moderator danced with American Ballet Theater from 1976 to 1986. She holds a Master of Arts degree in journalism and has written about dance for a variety of publications, most recently Time magazine, with the piece co-written with Mikhail Baryshnikov featuring the Nutcracker as its theme. She is co-founder of Mighty Egg Productions, a video journalism production company specializing in creatively visualized stories for foundations, advocacy groups, and arts organizations. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Lisa Rinehart.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be moderating what I hope will be a spirited discussion and to be with you out there in cyberspace this evening. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I identify as a white woman of a certain age with blue eyes and lightly graying hair in need of a cut. I'm wearing a dark gray t-shirt and some sparkly earrings in honor of our Nutcracker discussion this evening. I wanted to start with a little background because the Nutcracker as a dance piece has a really interesting history. It was first staged as a ballet in 1892 in St. Petersburg, Russia by Marius Petipa and Lev Ivanov. It was based on Alexander Dumas' adaptation of E.T.A. Hoffmann's very dark tale, The Nutcracker and the Mouse King. The score was by Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. Given how beloved the Nutcracker is now, it's surprising to learn that the ballet was not a success back in 1892. The critics complained about unruly children running around in the party scene, These were students of the Imperial Ballet School, and at that time it wasn't common to see them on stage. And some remarked that the Grand Pas de Deux was insipid and came too late in the evening. And one critic even described the original Sugar Plum Fairy, Antonietta del Era, as corpulent and podgy. Ouch. But Tchaikovsky's glorious score survived this lackluster beginning, and the Nutcracker was restaged many times over the years. First, a few times in Russia, and then in England. The first American production was created by William Christensen for the San Francisco Ballet in 1944. But it was George Balanchine's 1954 version for the New York City Ballet that is credited with making the Nutcracker the US holiday tradition we know today. The best part of the Nutcracker history, however, in my opinion, is that it is still in the making. The Nutcracker continues to be reimagined by choreographers around the world, and that includes the 4 incredible artists on our panel this evening. Donald Byrd's The Harlem Nutcracker centers the story on a lonely widow facing her first Christmas without her husband. The score is by Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn. It's a jazzy take on Tchaikovsky's composition, and there's additional music by David Berger. Michelle Dorrance's Nutcracker Suite is a tap rhapsody also inspired by the Ellington Strayhorn score. And Jennifer Weber's hip-hop version whips Tchaikovsky's music into 21st century New York. Troy Schumacher has staged his version on-site at the Wethersfield estate in Dutchess County with New York City Ballet dancers and full COVID protocol. It's a lot to cover, but let's watch excerpts from each of these wonderful pieces before we meet our panel. Oh, sorry. Let's meet our panel. Donald, why don't you go first?
I'm Donald Byrd. I'm the artistic director of Spectrum Dance Theater based in Seattle, Washington. I am a Black man, an African-American man. I'm sitting in a room that I use as a kind of office, but also is a storage space for much of my archival materials. So it's kind of messy in the back. My pronouns are he, him, his. What I am wearing a knitted cap. I'm wearing a black blazer with a black t-shirt and glasses and a graying, scruffy beard, which is what version 3 or 4 of my facial hair for the COVID pandemic.
Michelle.
Hi, that was great, Donald. I'm Michelle Dorrance, artistic director of Dorrance Dance and co-creator, co-choreographer of the Nutcracker Suite. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a Caucasian woman with mostly brown hair, and I'm wearing a green Dickies jumpsuit and have a relatively messy background with a couch, my brother's keyboard here, and a handful of other things in the room.
Great. And Jen, how about you?
Hey everybody, I'm Jen Weber. I'm the artistic director of Decadence Theater and the director, choreographer, and co-creator of the hip hop Nutcracker. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as a female Caucasian, and I'm sitting in my kitchen at the moment, and there's a mirror behind me, so if you see something weird, it might be a reflection of someone else walking through the space. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks, everybody.
Great. Happy to have you. And Troy.
Hello, I am Troy Schumacher. I am the artistic director of BalletCollective and the choreographer and director of the Nutcracker at Wethersfield. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I identify as a Caucasian male. I am currently sitting in the living room of the Wethersfield estate right now. I'm getting ready and I'm wearing a gray flannel t-shirt or button down, I guess.
Great. Troy, I thought I'd start with you first, since you do have someplace to be shortly. I know that some of our panelists might disagree that that the Nutcracker is a money-making proposition, but it's often the impetus for creating a production case. Aside from that possibility, what inspired you to create this on-site version for Wethersfield?
Of course, yeah. I mean, coming from New York City Ballet, it's obviously a huge source of ticket revenue. And I think that large-scale organizations are able to invest lots of funds into production. It pays off year after year because it's this very, very important holiday tradition. And this summer, I just finished creating the first full ballet since the pandemic, and we premiered it outdoors upstate in the Millbrook, Dutchess County area. And, it's still nice outside where we could do a little bit of dancing. You could still go on socially distanced walks with your friends. And I was just really worried about what was going to happen when the seasons changed and you couldn't go outside and all the holidays were getting canceled for people and families and children. And also, the window was really closing for outdoor performance, which was really the only way that we could survive in New York and creating new art. And I was brought to this estate in mid-September about presenting an outdoor performance next summer. And I was brought inside the house and I just thought, oh my gosh, is this the set of the Nutcracker? And the wheels started really spinning because I've been really just depressed about how so many of my colleagues, not just dancers, but designers and stagehands and wardrobe people, have been out of work for months and months and months. So I just thought look, this is a perfect opportunity because people love the Nutcracker. People want that tradition. But really why I dove into this is that I thought it would be something that'd be amazing any year, but really only possible to create in 2020.
I wondered about that. I wondered if you had this thought before the pandemic arrived or if it was the product of. And it sounds like it was the product of.
Yeah, no, I mean, I had to do basically 12 to 18 months worth of admin and producing work in 11 weeks on top of choreograph and direct an entirely new production of this.
Wow. Yeah, that's phenomenal. So then I wanted to go to Jen, and since you use the Tchaikovsky score in your version, but with obviously added elements, so I'm just wondering what spurred you to make your version of the Nutcracker?
Well, before I had made the Nutcracker, I've been sort of interested for a very long time in how come there's so many reimaginations of classic texts in theater, like so many versions of Shakespeare, but in dance, it's not the same tradition of reimagining a classic. And since hip hop is really a culture based in samples, I was really interested in how we could mix these worlds together. So before I had made the Nutcracker, I had actually done Stravinsky's Firebird as a sort of reimagination. And so that's what got me into sort of taking on like a classic ballet, but like refocusing it with a hip hop vocabulary. But when I did the Firebird, I didn't actually use a lot of the Stravinsky music. I used very little of it. So when I had this opportunity to create the Nutcracker, I really wanted to stay true to the music, because I think there's a lot of really interesting storytelling that's possible when you mix hip hop dance with classical music, because people don't necessarily think those two things go together, but it turns out they go together in an amazing way. And it's like just full of surprises, because the way dancers articulate what they hear, it sort of changes the way you listen, because, you know, we're sort of controlling what sounds we're making the loudest by like how we embody the score. So that's what got me really excited about this, you know, ability to take on this classic story, but also take on this classic music and just put it through a new frame.
Yeah, it's amazing that those two things go together. For someone coming from a ballet tradition, I find it fascinating. And Donald, what inspired you to create your version?
As everyone's referenced the tradition of it, and so I felt when the idea came to me was that that there were people that were being left out of the tradition, and in particular, I mean that African Americans, Black communities, even were not part of that tradition of the Nutcracker. I mean, people knew about it, but they didn't go see it because what they saw on the stage did not speak to them in some way, and so what. The real impulse behind it was to create an inclusive, or a version that included Black people or the Black community in the narrative, in the storytelling, and in fact, in the tradition of this holiday classic. And so that was really the thing. Can I include Black people in the Nutcracker tradition? Now, I had thought about a lot of things. That there been many versions of the Nutcracker that were said to be, people thought of as being American versions. I think the Robert Joffrey version that the Joffrey Ballet did had a very kind of particular Americana kind of slant on it. I think even the version that Lou Christensen did in San Francisco had that sense of Americana in it as well. So I think that there's always been a desire, I think, to create in America, to have Nutcrackers that were reflected America. And so I was particularly interested in reflecting Black America and the elements that are specific and unique to Black communities in the Nutcracker.
Was that part of your decision to go with the Ellington Strayhorn score?
I think that actually kind of happened a little bit before, because David Berger, who did the additional music and arranged the remainder of the Tchaikovsky score in the Ellington style, I had heard a concert that he had done with his band, his big band, that was, and I thought, so it was the music itself that actually, that listening to the Ellington Strayhorn music that gave me the idea, well, I can put it maybe in this Black context. It might resonate differently for people. And so, and also because he had given the titles, Ellington and Strayhorn had given each section these kind of catchy little titles like Peanut Brittle Brigade, Sugar Rum, something, the sugar, I don't know what they have these really great little like jazzy, cool kind of titles.
And Michelle, you use that same score at what, like, and obviously for you that translated into tap, the ability to use tap with that. How did that happen?
I'm with Donald. The music is so inspiring. The Ellington Strayhorn interpretation is like, I couldn't stop listening to it after. My mother actually, with two of her colleagues here in North Carolina, Diane Elbert and Carol Richard, they choreographed a Nutcracker that wasn't really about the Nutcracker necessarily, but it was like adults at a cocktail party. It felt like a different interpretation of what this music could be in a certain way. And I know that inspired me. In fact, we ripped off this one idea of theirs for the very end of our work. But because I was a young teenager and they had performed to this, I was obsessed with the music. And I fell in love with jazz at a really young age because that's what we're raised dancing to. It is literally part of the family of tap dance and part of the legacy of tap dance, right? So, but my gosh, I stole the CD from my mom. Like, I still have that CD. That's what I have in New York. I stole it from her in North Carolina. I feel terrible. But I was obsessed with it, with that suite. And I'd always thought about it. And of course, the legacy of what Donald's done, there's so many great Nutcrackers out there. And the only way I thought we could even approach it is it touches upon another thing Donald mentioned. And it's just sort of to honor the legacy of what the Nutcracker could be inside of the jazz tradition. And that's to have, Josette Wiggins saying yes to being the Sugar Rum Cherry and a choreographer and co-creator is the reason we moved forward with it. So that was sort of the ground. And then our other co-creator, Hannah Heller, I wrote her not long before we got on StreamYard together. And she said, the thing I'm most proud about is that we climbed our way into it like children. And I think that's the other thing that the Nutcracker asks you to do, is to see everything from a child's perspective. So from music that I've fallen in love with, as a child, and, to have this story interpreted through really Black vernacular dance and jazz is, I thought, was just one of the most important things culturally we could do right now in relationship to it. Or right now, it's a year ago, but kind of still feels right now.
It's brilliant. So clearly the music was key for everyone, regardless of which music you used. And I do think that's one of the huge secrets of the Nutcracker. But the other one is what Michelle touched on, this idea of childness, the openness and freedom of, or the openness to wonder that a child can still possess. Troy, how did you imagine that translating into your version in a house and out in the garden? And you stuck more or less to the more traditional telling of the story, or did you? How did you approach the story?
Yes, I apologize. It's actually, there's some tech stuff happening in the background right now, so you could just hear that music playing of the finale of the Nutcracker. So really what excited me about this production was like trying to make it really the audience's story, right? Because I think that what is challenging about this story in general is like, it's not really a family that people can really relate to or relate that experience. But the vision I had for this was actually arriving at this mansion and the doors opening and you actually finding yourself a guest at the party scene. And it begins very traditional, telling that classic story of the parents and the child and the uncle coming in and giving the Nutcracker doll, and then guests eventually leave the house. And what happens about a third of the way through the production is that like every audience member becomes that Clara/Marie character, and the Nutcracker actually saves them from the Mouse King and takes them on this journey. And then they arrive eventually to the Land of Sweets, where it's the audience that's sitting at a table covered with confections and cakes and bonbons as they have this moment that's like purely for them. So there's no fourth wall really in this production. It's a very intimate, kind of like personal experience, even though we have like 100 different COVID protocols that we're kind of like working within. So it's like immersive, but distanced at the same time.
Will you continue to do this in future years, do you think?
Like this whole thing really started as a catalyst to like try to do something interesting and get a bunch of people back to work. But as it was progressing, I really felt like we had something special on our hands. And, what's really kind of the saddest part about this is we couldn't open this up to the public. We couldn't sell any tickets. There's no revenue at all in this production. It's been completely funded purely to get all of these workers in the performing arts back to work. And the feedback that we've been getting, both critical and personal, and even from dancers or people who watched our first stream last night, has just been so immensely positive. So, I don't think in any other year you could try to sell a Nutcracker that only 32 people can see at a time, but I think that there's ways to scale it up either here at Wethersfield or elsewhere. So, we've just been so grateful for this opportunity to dance and create and perform again. It's just been so special.
It's wonderful. And if you do have to duck out, feel free.
Okay.
And have a great performance.
Yeah, you all are so inspiring. So thank you for including me on this stream. And I apologize that I have to go do some more work in the TED tonight. So thank you.
Bye. Damn. Now I've lost track of if I'm muted or I'm not muted. Can you hear me? Thank you. Jen, how about you with your story? How did you work through your story? Because it's kind of sticks to the original tale, but at the same time, it's obviously placed in a totally different world, wonderful, wonderful world. So tell us a little bit about how you arrived at that.
Sure. Well, I co-created the sort of story with Mike Fiddleson of the United Palace, which was the original theater where we did the Hip Hop Nutcracker back in 2013, actually, a long time ago. And, we wanted to take like as many of the elements that people know and love about the Nutcracker and sort of try to stay true to those particular elements. But at the same time, we wanted to like give it our own take. And I think, what Troy was saying about like the sort of family is not a family that is easily recognizable in the current time. So we really wanted to give it much more of a feeling of, something that felt contemporary, that more people could relate to, like, especially like diversity was super important to us. So, we sort of created this journey with, we call her Maria Clara, kind of fusing the sort of Marie and Clara traditions together. And, she goes on this adventure where she meets the Nutcracker, who in our version is a guy who's selling nuts on the street. But, we also have Drosselmeyer, who comes and brings toys to the party, which are toys that come to life. We have the mice battling the soldiers. We have the epic snowflake ballet. So we have all those elements that people recognize. But one thing that's really special, I think, about ours is that we've worked really hard to create a narrative that connects Act 1 and Act 2 of the Nutcracker. So in the beginning of the show, we see Maria Clara's parents fighting. And we're not really sure what they're fighting about, but we're very clear that something's not going right in the family. And in Act 2, when we go to the Land of Sweets, we actually time travel back to the 80s, and we're in a bar, and it's New Year's Eve, and it's the night that Maria Clara's parents met. And we see all the love that they had dancing on the floor. And then we have to bring that love back to the present. So that was one of the things that, we really wanted to do, was create a narrative that held all the way through both acts, because sometimes it feels like there's a sort of story in Act 1 of the Nutcracker, and then Act 2 is a sort of showcase. So we really wanted to try to create a story that people could follow the whole time. And yeah, that's, it's definitely a project that, as we've done it, we started in 2013. It continues to evolve every year because it continues to be a collaboration with the artists who are a part of it. I think that's really important, that, every artist who becomes part of the storytelling of the Hip Hop Nutcracker, their voice is incorporated, because that is both, important to the artists that we work with, important to us, and important to collaboration. I think those things are imperative.
The version I saw, the artists, every one of them are just phenomenal, and they add so much to that story that you describe. It's really, really incredible.
Yeah.
Don, you really reimagine the story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you discovered that story?
Yes, it was a long time ago. No, but trying to recall what it was, I think the thing that I was interested in, I think because my grandmother had recently passed at the time, and so I wanted to do something to honor her in some ways, I think, and also because of this role that grandmothers play in Black communities. They're kind of in some ways the center of it. And so I wanted to kind of have an older woman be the Clara. And so in some ways, my Nutcracker is an inversion the original Nutcracker, instead of a young girl who is kind of perhaps on the verge of puberty and is starting to feel all of these things and the uncertainty about that. We have an older woman who is actually at the end of her life and is not sure what's going to come after that. So in my Nutcracker, we have, instead of having the Mouse King and fighting the mice, is death is there. Her impending death is always there. And also she is always questioning, I think, what her legacy is, what she's leaving behind. And so, and then also, this idea, her husband, who is her recently deceased husband, is her Nutcracker. And so a little bit like what Jennifer was saying, that we see how she got the Nutcracker. He gave the Nutcracker to her when on an early Christmas date or something that they had. And so the Nutcracker itself is significant. So when she is threatened by death, the Nutcracker comes to life to protect her from death. And so she takes that journey with him. The second act, because so much of it is, it's nostalgic in many ways. That the Land of Sweets is Club Sweets, which is based on the Cotton Club, and what would normally be the divertissement in the Land of the Sweets are floor shows at Club Sweets, and so ultimately at the end of it, what it is that she comes to accept that death is a part of life, and death appears to her again, but this time is as her husband, and this is on Christmas morning, and so she and the two of them ascend to heaven while her children and grandchildren are opening presents under the Christmas tree. So family is an important part of it, and but also that death is a part of it too. So and it was interesting. When we used to perform it, how children would respond to it, is that they would say, at first I was scared, and then I kind of understood by the time it got to the end. And so for me, that was a lot, that was important.
It really takes you on a journey, which is fantastic. And it's a completely different journey than one is prepared for at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's lovely. Michelle, it seems like your version evolves almost through the talents and vibrations of your dancers. Is that how you would describe how you found your way through this?
Interesting. I'm ever inspired by my dancers in relationship to character, and also I guess energy and tension and emotional narrative in anything I'm doing. And in this case, actually working with Josette and Hannah collaboratively, creating, what was going to be our narrative. I think what we were exploring, like, as we decided who the best fit was for a given character, then the character started to shape into something new. So it was usually the dancers come first. In this case, we really worked through some ideas, and then the dancers like further molded it and pushed it in maybe more eccentric directions, which I always love to lean into. But for instance, we didn't make a very pointed decision to have Clara be played by, Leonardo Sandoval, by a man, or the Nutcracker be played by a woman. They were just the right fit, right? And then we embraced it, so rather than we're making this pointed statement about gender, this just happens to be. So I think that was really important to us. And I think also when we happened upon the idea that Clara was going to be really awkward. I mean, also because, Leo is much taller than, Byron Tittle, who we had to play Fritz. So we were like, oh gosh, this is that awkward growth period of a young girl's life. We just sort of leaned into the things that we discovered. And we also found a few ideas, in part because, we did basically a one act, and we wanted to move through really important, or parts that were really important to us of the entire narrative, which of course, and as Donald mentioned before, in the Ellington Strayhorn adaptation, they really pick and choose some sections and they're fantastic, but that doesn't mean every part of the tradition or storytelling lives inside of it. So for instance, Traveling Through the Snow Passage is what we called it, was an a cappella section. And it was important to me to include a real, century-old tradition of sand dancing to help bring a texture to that. So, and that was just in the background. It wasn't even featured. It was a sonic element and more of a ghost-like element inside of it. So finding parts of the story that also leaned very strongly into, the traditions of tap dance and early American jazz, rhythmic. Honestly, tap dance is such a huge source of development for what became jazz music, right? Just some of the early percussive rhythms of the art form. So, but back to the narrative and the character, we ended up finding our way, Joseph and Josette Wiggin were our mother and father, although Josette could barely handle that because that's her brother, Joseph. So, but then, I explained to her that if we're going to use this device that is used in, The Wizard of Oz, for instance, where everyone in real life is also in this magical land. The Cavalier and the Sugar Rum Cherry were also the mother and father. So we're moving through this. Drosselmeyer had a patch on and was like part of the, the different elements, a full flower costume and a patch. Same thing with Fritz, with Fritz's bow tie. So we wanted these elements of, the real world to live inside of this world of magic, and that it is both a dream and reality at the same time. So it was really fun to investigate a lot of those things. And then also, one of my favorite things as a kid seeing the Nutcracker was Mother Ginger and watching like all these people pile out from under that skirt. And there isn't necessarily a Mother Ginger, the music doesn't exist in that score. So we turned, what would be, the Russian music into a, kind of managing to put it all into one. So I think we had a good time just exploring our favorite parts of the tradition and how they could serve the narrative inside of the larger scope of the jazz tradition, and continuing to honor various elements of that history as well.
Fascinating. Before we go to the Q&A, I just wanted to ask generally all three of you, what do you think it is about this piece, regardless of the score that you're using, regardless of the story, what do you think it is that makes it so compelling to audiences? Why do people just love to see this in all of its many, many, many forms? Maybe Jen, we'll start with you.
I'm really not sure why, to be honest. I had never seen the Nutcracker before I started working on it. It's not something like I grew up as a tradition participating in or going to at all. So I honestly didn't even have any sense of how massive it was until I started researching. And now having been a part of the Nutcracker tradition for a few years, I feel like it's the music. I feel like it's that amazing music. Like the first time I listened to the score of the Nutcracker, I recognized so many sections of the music from like commercials and from like holiday shopping, and it's like, oh, those are all the Nutcracker. Like I didn't even realize. And so I think there's just something about that music that puts you in a holiday mood, and I think people just love the tradition of that music and a story that's about love and magic, and like feeling like a child and having that nostalgia and creating new family traditions. I wish, to be honest, I wish we had more dance pieces in our culture that drew such a large audience. I think it's kind of sad that there aren't more. When people are always asking me like, what's the next one you're going to do? Is it going to be Hip Hop Swan Lake? And it's like, I don't think so, but I just wish there were more things of that scale, in terms of popularity. I think that's a good thing to think about, how we can all make them.
Any thoughts, either Donald or Michelle, on that topic? Like what is the magic behind the Nutcracker?
For me, I think the magic is that, if we think about it in terms of tradition, it's a tradition that families can share, It brings people closer together because it really is about, in some ways, I think it's about family. One of my favorite things in the Balanchine version of the Nutcracker is the party scene. And so that the children are so unruly, and then the boys are at any rate, and then the parents dance with the children. And it's like the parents then are teaching the children how to behave, how to be in society, how to be a part of something that's bigger. And I love that so much. And so for me, it's the Nutcracker is doing a version of that for us. It's teaching us, creating an opportunity for us to connect as a quote unquote family, whether we are related, our families that we are related to, or our friends, or the family of our community, or the family of our nation. Because in some ways, the Nutcracker is huge in America. I mean, Europeans tell me that it's big there, but it's not as big there as it is here. It doesn't kind of take over the way it does here. I do think that the Tchaikovsky music is a part of it, of course. It's just fantastic music. I mean, I think it's also worth noting that on the same program that the Nutcracker premiered, Tchaikovsky had an opera, Iolanta, that premiered at the same time. And that was the big hit of the evening, not the Nutcracker. And so it's something about Iolanta has barely survived, but the Nutcracker has. And so I do think that the music is a large portion of it, whether it's in the Tchaikovsky version or the Ellington Strayhorn version.
I agree with you, but I love your observation about the social norms, learning behavior from watching, especially because in so many versions, there's always the bratty kids at the party. There's always the parents reprimanding. There's always those fun and often really funny tropes. So it works. Michelle, did you want to add anything about your thoughts on why you think the Nutcracker continues to be such a popular piece?
Just in response to Jen and Donald, I too am captured by the original Tchaikovsky score in that it brings so much joy, and the tale itself, of course, has it really, it encompasses so much darkness as well. And I think that tension is really important, especially during a time where we are, American culture is celebrating so much joy surrounding the holiday season, but that's just not everyone's reality. So I think that's an important, I think that's an important emotional narrative and experience inside of the work. But also, as soon as Donald mentioned the unruliness of the boys, it just made me think of in creation. I have to thank Risa Steinberg, our choreographic advisor, for pushing back, because we just lost our minds at some point. I remember thinking we had very short amount of time to get through the entire thing, and we were really excited to use the original idea of the Rat Queen being killed in the original story, and that's what brings out the Rat King. So we had this Rat Queen pinata that Drosselmeyer had brought in, but Drosselmeyer was also maybe not entirely had control of his magic. He was getting a little too old. Things were going wrong. The boys hit the queen mouse pinata. The rats come in, and the rats, Risa said, the children who see the show are going to be terrified. And we were like, oh no. We became so rowdy and so playful inside of embracing these elements of being childlike and being asked, to kind of grow up inside of the story. I don't know. I think that the journey as a creative process was I also, could really identify what this is. I guess what I mean to say is I could re-identify what the experience is for a child to see this work and to experience the story in wanting to retell it from that vantage point. So that just kind of what the two of you both just said. Thank you for reminding me the why.
I want to go back to that darkness and actually throw out some questions that we're getting from others. And the first one is for you, Donald. And this is, I don't know who this question is from, but the question is that, or a statement first saying that the writer thinks that you made such a bold choice to include a deaf character in your version, as well as civil rights footage in the film version in the next phase, I gather, which we haven't seen yet. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about those choices.
originally that I felt that because we had an older woman as the central character who was dealing with the death, who's recently widowed, dealing with the death of her husband, that death would be a presence that was there for her in her thinking all the time anyway. So it would always be in the background. And so, and then in the original version, there was a sequence that we called time travel, where death confronts her with these images from her own life that go back to whenever it was, either the 20s or the 30s, and kind of move through time. And so they were done on stage as tableaus. And so with the pandemic and wanting to kind of explore some more, which is what the workshops are about, is about, okay, if we decide to do this again in the future, then how would these scenes from the past kind of play out? And so the images from in the film, they're called What Black People Have Endured. And so there are these segments of basically of Black history from the Tulsa massacre in 1921 or 22 up until the murder of George Floyd earlier this year. And so I thought that given the time that we are living in, the context that we are living in, that would be an appropriate way to address certain things about this woman's life, the character Clara, about her life and her history, and in fact, what she has endured, but also all Black people in America have endured.
Are you hoping that this revisited production, that we'll be able to see it next year or at some point?
It's scheduled for 2022. So I'm hoping that, as you mentioned earlier, like money, that we would be able to raise the money to actually put it on its feet then.
That would be incredible, because of course, aside from everything you've so eloquently described, it's also just a dance juggernaut. I mean, it's wild.
Yeah, it's a. I mean, when we did it originally, we had 25 dancers, and which for a contemporary dance company, that's a lot of dancers. I mean, unless you're Mark Morris, there's a lot of that's a lot of dancers. And so when we were touring, we had to, there were two complete casts for some things, and then there was a kind of hybrid cast that would use some people, because that was the only way we could get through it, because the dancers could not do, we were doing basic 5 to 8 shows a week, and 25 dancers was not enough to do that many performances.
Understood. Jan, I'm going to direct the next question to you, which is from Natalia Michaela Salvatierra. And she asks, what was it like for you to deal with any frustration you might experience translating from what was in your head, or what you imagined happening on stage, and what you were actually able to get from your dancers and to create on stage? That, what was that disconnect, or was there a disconnect between that process?
I mean, I feel like, when I get in the room with amazing dancers, like the cast of the Hip Hop Nutcracker, these are some of the most incredible movers and storytellers and artists. I feel like they can always make what's in my head better than what I could even imagine. And so I feel really lucky to work with such inspiring people, because, I think art and choreography is so much about collaboration, and you come in, you have all these plans. Sometimes you have charts and drawings and ideas. And then, when you get in the room, it's like magic, like it happens somehow, but it's never about like sticking to like a very specific plan. It's all about like feeling the flow and like, like different ideas coming in and like pushing you in different directions. And, in Hip Hop Nutcracker specifically, some of it is very, very choreographed. And then there's also moments that are sort of what we call a directed freestyle, where there's like, sort of like narrative points that the dancers have to hit, but they are free to do it in the moment as they would, because they are experts at their own movement style. And that's something that's so special, is like that ability to have that freedom and to juxtapose that with the moments that are more choreographed. But I always feel that the inspiration is in that moment. And I'm always like blown away by what, how people embody and physicalize the crazy ideas that are in my head. It's always magic.
Your dancers were also, in the film version that I saw, the dancers are also incredible actors. They really tell that story beautifully.
I think dancers are actors, like we are physical storytellers. We have to communicate. We're not just about steps. We're about steps that tell a story, and in a wide variety of ways. And that's something we work on too. Just like we work on the craft of the movement and the detail and the technique, we also work on the craft of storytelling and character and relationship and connecting to the audience. All those things. It's all part of the process of the show.
And you weave those two things together brilliantly.
Thank you.
I will say, in the film version that I saw of this, it's the first time I've ever seen a credit for physical therapy during the credits. And I think it's deserved, because it's hard to imagine how those dancers would get through it repeatedly.
Yes.
When will we be able to see this again, your version? Do you know?
Right now, you could see the film version. We have a digital tour. So we are partnering with many venues to be able to bring the Hip Hop Nutcracker film version to people this holiday season. And then we will, fingers crossed, be back on the road next season. We've been touring across America and globally for the last 5 years. And yes, you absolutely need a physical therapist when you go on the road. We only have 12 dancers and 2 musicians doing all the parts of the Nutcracker. So it's incredibly physically challenging between the show itself and the tour bus. It's not an easy gig. But yeah, we hope to be doing that not so easy gig as soon as possible.
And Michelle, you just premiered your version a year ago. Are there plans for it to return?
Absolutely. We of course would have been touring the work itself this particular winter. So we're making new plans and also trying to harness all of the plans that would have been for this year, next holiday season. So, and that's not to say we're not revisiting elements of it in hopes to be able to share with a wider audience in different mediums as well. So, I don't want to speak too much about that and let everyone down, but hopefully that will be happening soon as well. But yeah, I think that's all you asked, right? Okay, great.
But I have another one from another audience member, and they are asking, Michelle, was it important to you to include gender neutral characters?
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about that before. I think the dancers that I am, or dancers, human beings, artists that I'm attracted to don't live in some sort of heteronormative world or landscape, or have spirits that lend themselves to those types of things. So, and I think that that's a very broad or general pass at what I think is really important in like a quality that lives and manifests differently in each one of my dancers, but that is something that I seek in human beings, is an open-mindedness and an open-heartedness, so that things can move through you in such a way that what Jen was just describing, in your effort at being a genuine storyteller, that it isn't so much of an act to be in a space that might be gender neutral or gender bending. That I think the most important element of what you're conveying is the spirit of something. So I think that it became important to us while we were investigating in the original creative period, before we were in a studio moving, before we were dancing to music, that became a very important thing that we were investigating inside of what is a story for children, for adults, for children, that I think it's important for young people to see, for old people to observe young people seeing, and then for there to be a conversation about that. And also that it's okay. And also that, you're okay if you're a strange, awkward girl that ends up becoming a hero. That's part of, I mentioned that I didn't read the original title, but I mentioned that we really wanted to include this idea in the title, and it's sort of riffing on Duke Ellington's own riffing when he describes things. We used a lot of language that sort of honored that language that is a part of our tradition. So I'm just going to say it so that it's sort of part of what we're bringing into the space. But we said we present to you the Nutcracker Suite, or a rhythmaturgical evocation of the super leviathanic enchantments of Duke and Billy's supreme adaptation of Tchaikovsky's masterpiece that tells a tale of a misunderstood girl who kills a king and meets a queen. And don't forget, she gon' make it, daddy. And that it ain't so bad after all. So part of it is that journey, and it is those things. I hope that sort of answers the question.
I'd like to say something about something that Michelle brought up. That's an amazing title. You should always do the whole title, by the way. But the idea about the dancer and whether it was gender neutral or not, I think I want the same thing from my dancers. I actually want the dancer to be able to embody humanity, regardless of how it manifests itself. So sometimes it's tied to gender, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's tied to spirit, but whatever it is that they have, that they need to embrace their whole humanity, so that they are able to put that humanity in front of audiences, so that audiences recognize themselves and what they're doing.
That's beautiful, Donald. Thank you.
I think you summed up pretty well just exactly what art can do for all of us in all of its very many forms, in all shapes, sizes, colors, genders, everything. And gosh, you three have done that incredibly elegantly, beautifully, inspiringly, and with so much humor and fun. This has been a real pleasure to talk with you on this topic. I wish we could talk for another hour. I wish everyone who's watching had a chance to see all of your versions and then talk about it, because I feel like it's always hard to talk about something that is visual and oral and not have seen it. But you guys brought your pieces to life very well, and I thank you for that. I guess, is there anything anyone else would like to add about what doing this production meant to you? Maybe the act of creation. Did it change you in any way? This is a big question to throw at you at the very end of this, but did anyone have any kind of revelatory experience putting their production together that has shaped their work going on?
Just one thing I would say about that, in some of the I think the email from Vernon, and it talked about, it was from you, Lisa, about that we know that the financial part of it is, people think of the Nutcrackers being cash cow, and so the thing is that I learned from it, that I got from the whole experience of doing it, is that can't be a reason to do it. I mean, I could if I go into the commercial theater, do Broadway, that money and cash is an incentive and is the reason to do it. And maybe that the money was the initial impulse, the cash cow was the initial impulse. But actually, when it came down to it, it actually had very little to do with the decisions that were made about what it was and how I feel about it, and why I think the production I did is why it's important to me. I mean, the most important thing I think for me is that it connected me to the Black community in a way that I had not been connected before. You would think, being a Black man, as you said, Lisa, of a certain age, that I would have been connected. But I think it was the thing, it was the connector, it was the bridge that actually maybe reconnected me to the Black community. So I'm grateful for the experience of doing the Harlem Nutcracker, even though much of it was painful. But I am really grateful for it.
Well, thank you. I beautifully said. Jen, Michelle, anything you guys want to add about how putting your productions together might have changed the way you work moving forward?
I'll jump in. I mean, for me, like to create the Hip Hop Nutcracker was just an amazing experience. And I think every time I create something, I learn so much in the process that I can take on to whatever is the next project. But I remember when we were doing our sort of dress rehearsal of the Hip Hop Nutcracker the very first time, and we brought in like, I don't know, maybe like 1,000 school kids as our audience for dress rehearsal. And I remember like how excited they all were and how much it was like so clear sitting in the back of the house that they were all following the story completely. And there's not one word of dialogue. It's all told through dance. And they fully understood the whole thing. And I think that's like a real, like, that's what I take away from it, is just how powerful dance can be to tell a story. And how much that, you know, people can really how much people can understand, especially kids can understand in that physical storytelling, and how much you can put in of yourself when you take away spoken language, right? Like how much you can then put in to like follow that journey yourself. And I just remember all these kids like just going wild. Like I felt so bad for their teachers having to take them back to school after that. And like they were so pumped up. The dancing in the hallways was just wild. So yeah, that's my takeaway, is just the power of storytelling. You know, it's amazing.
Fantastic. Michelle, anything?
I'm just going to quickly add, because what Jen and Donald both said just inspired this. This is one of the only things I've created that I've been able to step out of completely as a dancer. And that is its own gift. But watching, I think what Jen said about storytelling and children, and what Donald was saying about the Black community, I think what I learned from this story, and that what we kind of have all been talking about in this evening's conversation, is just that this is a huge part of our culture and our community. And standing at the back of the house to watch, take notes, etc., I got to observe the full, and this is at the back of the house at the Joy, so I can see every single audience member, which is different from a lot of houses. But to literally observe and be a part of the community receiving this, and for me, the most dancers I've ever put on stage as an artistic director, 25 dancers. So and you know, we're a much smaller company than that. So that this community of dancers, the larger TAC community, our community, are, you know, dance supporters, but also because it's the Nutcracker, maybe folks that have never seen either tap dance or, you know, something before in their lives. So I think what I really valued in this experience was that there was such a tremendous community and a positive community surrounding everything about the production. And, you know, the energy that you investigate because of it. So I'm grateful to that. And also just honored to be a part of this legacy with the folks in here in this chat, and Troy who left. It's a special legacy.
You're in the Nutcracker Club now. Well, thank you to all of you for participating in this. It was really my pleasure and honor to talk with you about this. And I would just say, let's all go out there and try to make the best of a very strange holiday season, and revisit the Nutcracker in our hearts, since that's as close as we can get right now, or maybe a film. But thank you so much.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Donald. Thanks, Jen. So cool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Yes, thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael.
Bye now.